As we begin our position review series from the 2023 season, we're going to take a look at where the Broncos quarterback position was at, but we'll also take a look ahead at the projected outlook here for that position specifically in 2024. You're going to get that and much more in today's brand new episode, Locked on Broncos.
You are Locked on Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day.
The quarterback position for the Denver Broncos is going to be drastically different in 2024 by our anticipation, but how did Denver get here? We'll break it all down on today's brand new episode of Locked on Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much, Broncos Country, for tuning in and making us your first listen of the day every single day. And all you everydayers out there, we're so grateful for you for making this show exactly what it is. You can get Locked on Broncos for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. Thank you so much to everybody in Broncos Country. I'm Cody Roark, Broncos reporter for Mile High Sports, joined alongside, as always, by Sayre Bedinger, site expert, predominantlyorange.com. For the next 2 weeks, we're going to be diving deep into our position review series, looking back on 2023 while also looking ahead to 2024. A lot of different storylines for every position on this Broncos roster as we go forward, and we're kicking things off with quarterback. And Sayre, 2023, you're the quarterback here for the Broncos. It was better than what it was in 2022, but now with everything that's happened so far throughout the course of the season, it's led to us being in a position where we're going to have to talk about quarterback for a while until Denver gets that addressed for the long term, as it looks like the long-term option is not going to be Russell Wilson or Jarrett Stidham.
Right. And we expected Russell Wilson to improve in 2023, right? I mean, it was just, we talked about it on this podcast a number of different times. Like I even said, I refuse to believe that 2022 Russ is what we've got. I think there's no way he's going to be consistently playing as poorly as we saw. And there were a lot of factors with that, right? It wasn't just Russ playing bad. He was dealing with injuries, the offensive coaching staff, X, Y, and Z. You know, there was a lot of factors and circumstances, but Sean Payton came in. He and Russ had seemingly a pretty good working relationship there, at least for the majority of the season. But we kind of saw at the end of the year, it really tapered off. The frustration sort of mounted, I think, that Monday after that Houston Texans game. Remember the kind of, I guess it's not really infamous and nobody really talks about it that much, but Sean Payton's Monday media availability after that Houston game, where he kind of called out Russell Wilson without even saying his name. He's talking about communication. He's talking about missed opportunities to Jerry Jeudy. He's talking about end of game situation being, a complete failure with Lucas Kroll being out of position. It just felt like there was a dissonance between those two as the season wore along. Not that there was, I mean, people make too much of a deal, Cody, about the yelling on the sideline and things like that. Like that's
football.
That's football. That's sports. Like, so people need to get over it. I mean, that's so annoying to me. But at the same time, the dissonance, you can see it and it unfolding, how, there's timeouts being taken at times where you're like, why can't they get this play off? Or why are they calling a timeout after the 2-minute warning or whatever? There was certain situations like that, right? So just communication. I think we saw this relationship, not necessarily their personal relationship, but the football relationship sort of fizzle as the year went along.
And part of that, too, is, as we all know, and the Broncos are holding firm behind that, the reason that Russ sat for the final 2 games, I mean, Sean Payton came out and said that it was because they needed a spark, and then there was no spark with Jarrett Stidham. But the front office side of things said that, hey, we approached Russ to ask him to push his injury guarantee back, and because if he were to get injured in those final 2 games, Denver would have been on a serious financial hook for not only 2024, but 2025 as it pertains to guaranteed money kicking in. And I think that was obviously a big part of it. But if there was really a need for a spark, I just didn't see how it was going to come from Jarrett Stidham, right? We talked about how maybe it could have, but at the end of the year, when players talked about the end of the season, like a lot of players, Jeff Legwold of ESPN had a great report where he talked to a variety of different players who were pissed about how things were handled with Russell Wilson. And so part of me wonders, like, how much of that impacts maybe the morale inside the locker room? I don't think from a long-term standpoint, it's going to be, withstanding. I think it was just like in the current moment, like within the 2 weeks, 3 weeks of that being the reality of Denver, I think it was on the minds of players, and obviously they were paying attention to it. And I can tell you this, but being in the locker room, like the day it was announced that Russ got benched, we were at practice, and Sayre, they were inside the field house at the Pat Bowlen field house, indoors practicing. music jamming, and yet it was dead quiet. It was like a funeral. It was the oddest thing. Like all of us in the media, myself, Ryan McFadden, Parker Gabriel, we sat and were like, it is very weird feeling in here. And it was just like this tension. And unfortunately, it didn't lead to the Broncos offense really doing too much in those final 2 weeks. They won one game, lost the season finale against the Las Vegas Raiders. Overall, though, now that leads us to our next point. Jarrett Stidham got 2 games of action here for Denver, and it just wasn't anything that stood out. Now, I think it would be unfair to just judge him on 2 games specifically because how much time has he been able to get to really acclimate himself? I think from a commanding operation of the offense, I thought Jarrett Stidham did well. He was under a lot of duress, especially in that final game of the regular season. He didn't put up big numbers, but he wasn't terrible, in my opinion.
Right, and I don't think so either. I think he was pretty solid, like you mentioned, commanding the offense. We saw the middle of the field open up a little bit more in terms of the passing game, which kind of was part of the goal going into that. At least so we thought, right? We want to see more of those developing routes with the quarterback climbing up in the pocket as opposed to scramble drill and things like that. And so there was some of that, and I think that I don't know. I mean, when you look back at what Sean Payton said in the 2023 offseason, how quietly the Jarrett Stidham signing was a very important one for the team, how he talked about his arrow is trending upward and things like that. And you just kind of wonder, like, where do they go from there? I mean, or what are their thoughts after seeing him play? Like you said, it's a 2-game sample. Sean Payton really liked the 1-game sample last season in the 2022 season when Stidham was quarterbacking the Raiders and kind of dominated the 49ers defense. He really liked that. But at the same time, it's kind of now, hey, you got big questions moving forward, which I know we're going to be talking about on today's episode, but it now leads us to that point. Like we saw what Russell Wilson could do with Sean Payton. Does he believe there's growth to be had from that? And with Jarrett Stidham, I mean, do you still believe what you said about him in the offseason? It's going to be fascinating to see.
And I think part of it's also like who you have around you, like personnel. Like in Vegas, he had Devontae Adams, Darren Waller at the time, Hunter Renfrow, and he was not in the doghouse still. Josh Jacobs, like they still had pretty good players. And that helps for a guy like Stidham if he's got guys that he can go to, especially guys of that caliber. Whereas you look at Denver, there's Cortland. Look, Cortland was coming off of having a concussion, not playing against the Chargers, had a rough game against the Raiders there. But we all know Cortland is still probably the top playmaking wide receiver for Denver. There's obviously going to be some questions coming up. We'll get to later on in the series here this week on Locked On Broncos about the wide receiver position. Tim Patrick, will he be back in 2024? There's so many different things here. I think who you have around you is imperative. And look, we also have to factor in for the Broncos quarterback position, Denver did not have a good enough sustainable run game in terms of consistency all season long. They had games where, hey, they were winning when it was working, and when they couldn't run the ball, they were losing, and it was not pretty for Denver. So for me, there are so many different factors outside of just the performance of Russ, just the performance of Stidham itself. The overall offensive operation has to get better. But that's going to lead us into some questions here. What are some of the biggest questions surrounding the Broncos quarterback position, how it currently stands going into 2024? That's something we'll break down and we'll answer here on today's brand new episode, Locked On Broncos. Today's Locked On Broncos is brought to you by our friends over there at eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. It's what brings home the winning trophy. It's also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors, they have everything that you need to maintain your vehicle and to level it up to peak performance, whether that's having superchargers, getting roof racks, exhaust kits, or LED headlights for your number one ride or die and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors, they've got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts that you need at the prices that you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Once again, that's ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers.
What now? The Denver Broncos, big questions at the quarterback position. It's going to define the entire offseason. Will Russell Wilson be back? If he's not back, where's he going to go? What does the team still think of Jarrett Stidham? Are they going to go to free agency? Are they going to trade for someone? Are they going to go to the draft? We've got questions and we've got some possible answers we're going to discuss on today's episode of Locked On Broncos, but want to say thank you to every single one of you that makes Locked On Broncos your first listen of the day every single day right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. We appreciate every single one of you so much for making us part of your day, however you choose to do so. Free and available everywhere that you listen to podcasts, as well as you can find the show on YouTube and engage in the comments section with other members of Broncos Country. There's going to be a lot of sounding off, I feel, Cody, in the comment section this offseason about hypothetical quarterback moves, all of these quarterback questions, what moves end up getting made. It is going to be a frenzy in Denver in 2024. And of course, I think the first question that we got to ask is a fair question, right? What is the best course of action for the Broncos at quarterback? Or can we answer that right now? That's a tough question, but it's fair. And I think that's going to really ultimately define the entire 2024 offseason.
I think right now we cannot definitively say what the best course of action is. I know you and I both have our preferences of what Denver should do. I think we're both in agreement that Denver at pick number 12, there's a quarterback they like, they should take the shot on the quarterback. I think we're in agreement on that. Obviously, the free agency's coming up before the NFL draft. So part of that is also throwing a little bit of a wrench into maybe our forecasting here. I would really like to see one day, can we have the NFL draft happen before NFL free agency? How might that change the dynamic of how teams prepare for the offseason? I think that would be a really cool shakeup. It actually might be very, very beneficial. And I wonder how it would change the strategy of how teams approach certain things in terms of now you're drafting, maybe do you draft best player available, or does it shift to drafting based on need, and then free agency comes where you draft to fill in depth or other things like that? I don't know. An interesting question to throw out there. We'll see if that happens one day. So much is going to be contingent, though, Sayre. Will Russell Wilson be back, or will he depart the Broncos this offseason? As we've talked about throughout the entire offseason so far leading up to this episode, all signs point to the Broncos and Russell Wilson splitting and parting ways. That's expected here when the new league year begins officially on March 13th, 2 o'clock p.m. Mountain Time when everything becomes official. And obviously a lot of stuff is going to be happening in free agency. You're going to see a lot of moves announced. And if he is released, is it a post-June 1st designation, or is there a possibility out there that there could be an NFL team that would be interested in trading for Russell Wilson? And I know we've talked about this before in the past. Would Denver have to attach any of their draft picks to that? If that's the case, you know my answer. I'm not comfortable with attaching draft picks to trading away Russell Wilson to another team, because then that puts Denver in a bad position as well. However, you can't help but maybe look at the side. If it helps Denver financially from the salary cap and his overall contract, is it a necessary gamble to take? I mean, that's where I really struggle with this whole conversation here.
I do too. I think it's very convoluted when it comes to the salary cap and understanding what's possible, what's not. You know, you kind of like optimistically, you like to think that there's a chance that the Broncos could trade Russell Wilson without having to give another team draft picks. I mean, we see things like this in the NBA sometimes where you kind of do like player buyouts and things like that. And I just don't know how realistic any of that really is in the NFL, Cody. I'm not an NFL general manager or an NFL team accountant or anything like that, so I don't know all of that.
Don't want to
but
be.
You like to. I don't want to be, exactly. That would be hectic. But man, I think of this potential here. Like if the Broncos are set on moving on from Russell Wilson, right, and they want to maximize value. Is it possible that we could see this ownership group convinced of paying Russell over the next 2 years and going to Russell Wilson's team and saying, hey, we'll give you, obviously you're getting the 39 million for 2024. That's guaranteed. The hang up right now has been the 37 million in 2025. If the Broncos are going to be moving on from Russ, they don't necessarily want to pay him. Would they be willing to say, let's rewrite the contract, right? You go shop yourself around as far as a free agent, you know, quote unquote, while you're still on the team, see if you can find a team that's willing to trade for you. We will foot the bill for 39 million or most of it, and then most of the 37 million, and you go play for that team, but we get something back in return, whatever that ends up being. If we're paying the price, we better get something decent in return. Because that Jeremy Fowler report from ESPN a few weeks back, a lot of teams apparently view Russell Wilson as a viable starter at this point. And if that's the case, I mean, the Broncos could say, look, we're willing to pay the money. And because we're willing to pay the money, Russell can either come here and compete for a job or he can not play. And that's that. And that may be the only leverage, is if the Broncos say we're willing to pay to keep him around and see what happens with that. If nobody wants to trade for him, and if he doesn't want to renegotiate, that's what we'll do. So I think it could be fascinating, Cody, what ultimately ends up. This is like a standoff, you know, and I don't know what's going to happen.
I don't know either. And look, hey, This whole topic is, and this has been the frustrating part about this whole situation, even the trade of Russ initially, is just it's become such a divisive topic in Broncos country, right? And I think there's validity to both sides. Like Russ feeling the way he feels, he's entitled to it 100%. Russ has done a lot of work behind the scenes. He's put in a lot of work. And I feel like, yeah, definitely he felt like he was wrong and he's entitled to that. Sean Payton is entitled to feel like, hey, I'm not necessarily sure I can move forward with him as my quarterback. I don't think any one specific party is in the wrong here. I think that because it's a messy situation, it's sticky. You look at it, and of course, like there's going to be different parts of the fan base that take different sides, right? There's people who are sticking up for Sean Payton. There's people who are sticking up for Russ. But I think at the end of the day, those conversations and those topics on social media have led to divisiveness in this fan base. And it's made it very ugly in terms of just being able to have the conversation. Because if you bring up one point about Russ or you bring up one point about Peyton, you get torn apart from either side. And it's just, let's have a logical conversation about it. And that's what Sean Payton did. Sean Payton was hired knowing Russ was going to be the quarterback, at least in 2023. The reality of the situation is it's up to him entirely as the head coach, who's got a lot of power under the Walton Penner ownership group, to say, you know what, I don't think we can get to where we want to be, why you guys hired me, if this is the dynamic that we have here and we need to go a different direction. That's where the head coach has a lot of the power in the situation. And it's not a negative indication of Russell Wilson in any way, shape, or form. So that's something to ponder here. Another thing is, and it's a very real possibility here for the Broncos as we get ready to talk about what's coming up in 2024, is Jarrett Stidham a viable starter for a season? Can you roll with him? And if you do, what type of risks are associated with that? As we know, Quinn Ewers of Texas decided to stay another year. Like, if you roll with Jarrett Stidham, Quinn Ewers probably going to be the top quarterback prospect in next year's NFL draft. Would that be a situation where Denver is maybe put into a spot where, hey, they might be in line for yet another pick? I don't know, though, because Sean Payton himself said he hates losing more than he loves winning. Like, he wants to win so desperately, and he absolutely hates losing. I just don't see him kind of throwing in the towel in a sense of that notion.
I don't think so either, especially after Greg Penner, the team owner and CEO, said they expect to be better than they were this past season, where they won 8 games. So you expect to be winning at least 9 games going forward. And if that's the expectation from the top down, what's the best way to possibly do that? Leads us back to the question of what is the best course of action at quarterback? Is it Jarrett Stidham? Can you win 9 or 10 games with Stidham? I mean, that's a tough ask for somebody who's never been a full-time starter in the NFL. And that would be a tough ask for a rookie, but at least if you're talking about a first-round pick, I mean, you're talking about somebody that you believe can be your franchise quarterback, as opposed to a Jarrett Stidham, who, all due respect, the Broncos did not sign him to a Brock Osweiler type of deal or anything like that. Like, they're not saying this is our guy, you know, they're saying this is somebody that we kind of like quite a bit. So I'm fascinated by all of that. And I think that there is validity to the concern from the fan base, Cody, that's wondering, like, is Sean Payton, is there too much hubris there? Are they believing in something that, like, we can't really see? Like, why are you're getting rid of Russell Wilson for what? And that's where I think the frustration from the fan base is like, you know, Russell had the team playing at a playoff level. You kind of figure if you don't bottom out defensively, you might be able to sustain that next year. And maybe he improves in the Sean Payton offense. And now you've kind of decided ahead of time that that's not going to happen by benching him and kind of ruining that relationship, so to speak, potentially. And so it's just all encompassing there in terms of the concern from the fan base, not knowing what's going to happen, not knowing exactly where they stand with these guys, or if even, you know, there's a possibility that Russ could come back. I mean, there's just so many different questions surrounding this position that, man, luckily we get the whole offseason to talk about it.
And Broncos country, and rightfully so. This is where I feel for them the most. They have been through quarterback hell before the whole Russell Wilson thing even happened. The carousel graphic. And look, that carousel graphic is going to return here in 2024, unfortunately, until Denver has a solidified option going forward. And maybe if they draft the guy, that'll be the guy of the future. But Broncos country is just so tired of trying to figure out who the hell the quarterback is going to be for this franchise, because they want stability. And realistically speaking, really outside of John Elway, really at that point, Jake Plummer was some consistency there. You had Jake Cutler for a couple years. I don't necessarily count that. Until Peyton Manning arrived, Denver hasn't had continuity really since Jake Plummer at the position. And then they went through this whole carousel from the time of having to replace Peyton Manning. Broncos country's tired of it. Rightfully so. They want an answer for the long-term solution. And hey, we're with you there, Broncos country. We want that for you here as well. So that's going to lead us into our projected outlook here for 2024. What do the Broncos have in terms of options? We're going to share our thoughts on what we think they should do. We're going to take a look at every potential scenario the Broncos could look at when it comes to quarterback in 2024. You're going to get that on today's brand new episode, Locked On Broncos. Today's Locked On Broncos is brought to you by our friends over there at FanDuel Sportsbook, America's #1 sportsbook. It's a big weekend that's coming up in the NFL world for the Super Bowl. And happy Super Bowl to all who celebrate from FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. If you're like me, Super Bowl Sunday is all about scoring the best seat on the couch, grabbing your favorite football snacks, and placing some bets. On top of that, you get to enjoy the commercials. You get to see all the different exciting things, including new movie trailers that are coming out as you watch the big game on Super Bowl Sunday. But FanDuel, they also have so many ways for you to end the season with a W or 2 or 3. Not only can you bet on who will win Super Bowl 58, but FanDuel also has bets for which players will score a touchdown in the game, how many points will be scored, and so much more. On top of that, you can do first touchdown score of the game, anytime touchdown score, who will score the second touchdown of the game, and is there a player out there that won't score a touchdown that usually does in those games? Those are some of the ways that you can get involved inside the app on the FanDuel Sportsbook. And new customers join today, and you'll get $200 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to sign up. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. As we jump into the fourth quarter action on today's episode, Locked On Broncos, we'll dive into every single option the Broncos may take a look at in 2024 as it pertains to addressing the quarterback position. Real quick, we just wanted to say thank you so much to everybody in Broncos country, all the everydayers out there, for making us your first listen of the day every single day. Just a reminder, you can get this podcast for free every single day, all year long, on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. So make sure you never miss a day, you never miss an episode of what's going on with your favorite team as we navigate through a very, very Rocky Mountain offseason. You're going to get that here, Locked On Broncos. Let's get into the outlook here of 2024, Sayre. Taking a look at every option here for the Broncos. I think we've even mentioned a couple, one being Russ could be back. Russ could be cut. Jarrett Stidham could be the starter at quarterback here in 2024. We've talked about those, and those are all options here. But Denver also could look outside the box a little bit as well. There are more options to be considered, including one player who signed a future contract who Sean Payton apparently is very, very high on.
That's right. I mean, Ben DiNucci won't be a greeter at Walmart anytime soon, Cody. He's signed a reserve future deal for the Broncos, which if you don't get that joke, Google it or something like that. I'm sure there's a million articles about it. But Ben DiNucci, a guy that Sean Payton obviously likes and is value to the quarterback room. I mean, that's important with these guys, right? Even if you're not talking about a future starter, you're talking about guys who add value to your room. And, quarterbacks coach Davis Webb, obviously, I think he's probably involved in these decisions as well. So certainly like to see Ben DiNucci back in the fold. And we know that's going to be the case as of the new league year in March. But what are the Broncos going to do in the starting role, right? And that's what we kind of talk about with Russ and Jarrett Stidham. Do they go the free agency route and bring in another bridge guy as a potential upgrade and somebody willing to sign for cheap? I heard recently, Cody, a soundbite from Kirk Cousins that he's like, I don't care about cash. And at this point, I've been blessed to make a bunch of money financially. I care more about the structure of the deal. And so that, then I start strapping on the tinfoil hat. I'm like, okay, so does Kirk Cousins, what is he interested in here? What are we talking about? But I mean, just any possibility right now. I mean, Jimmy Garoppolo has been thrown out there, Jacoby Brissett, a lot of options that aren't going to excite Broncos country a ton. I think that's why everybody's kind of rallying around the NFL draft. But I want to know your thoughts on any of these options that have been out there so far.
Well, I can tell you some of these free agent options. You mentioned Kirk Cousins, Ryan Tannehill set to become an unrestricted free agent. At this point of his career where he's at from an age standpoint, he is not going to get a big money deal. Like, I think Ryan Tannehill at this point is a guy who was a quality starter for some time in the NFL, no longer going to be that guy going forward. You mentioned Jacoby Brissett. Honestly, Jacoby might not be a bad option, though. When he stepped in for Washington, he did get banged up, which led to them having to go back to Sam Howell after Sam Howell initially got benched. Tyrod Taylor's an option coming out of the New York Giants. Marcus Mariota, who we've talked about for quite some time. I mean, to be honest with you, Marcus Mariota could be a guy, not necessarily going to be your pocket passing quarterback who's going to stand there, but like if we've seen Sean Payton get very creative with the usage of a guy like Taysom Hill, Marcus Mariota could do some things with his legs inside this offense, but would that be too similar to what we saw with Russell Wilson and how this offense was? Is that what Sean Payton is looking for? I'm not sure that is. Then there's obviously Jameis Winston, who came under a lot of fire for his decision to go victory formation and then hand the ball off to Jamal Williams as he scored a touchdown in a blowout over the Atlanta Falcons. It led to Arthur Smith and obviously Dennis Allen getting heated. Dennis Allen didn't call it. That was a player decision there. How is that looked upon by teams? I don't know. But look, I think players, you look at that and you talk to them, players love that. Players wanted Jamal Williams to get the touchdown. Jameis is a funny guy. He's obviously had a lot of great success, was off to a historic pace under Sean Payton when he was with New Orleans before he tore his ACL. That could be an option. And then obviously former friend, and this is not going to be very popular in Broncos country that we're bringing it up, but former friend Drew Lock. I've seen his name thrown out there on social media. Remember when Drew was still here, we always used to get comments on this podcast. Why'd you guys name your podcast after Drew Lock? I'm like, Locked On Broncos has nothing to do with Drew Lock. But I mean, that's a great assumption to make there. Could you imagine how wild the discourse would be if Drew Lock were to come back to the Broncos? I think our comment section would be unbelievably toxic because there'd be yet another split and divisiveness there. Though I would say I was very happy for Drew this season. For him, that game he had against the Philadelphia Eagles, he made some big time throws, and he's in a good place. And you couldn't help but feel good about Drew Lock in that situation. I still believe he didn't get the best shot, the best opportunity in Denver, and I could tell you there being there at practice, you could just tell Vic Fangio never liked him, and that hurt Drew in a big way. But could that be an option for a year? Some of these quarterbacks that I've mentioned, certainly a possibility. But I think at one point we also look at this. We talked about it as well. We did a Senior Bowl preview episode yesterday here where we looked at all the quarterbacks at the Senior Bowl this week. Would the Broncos look at an NFL draft pick? I know there are a lot of names out there like obviously Drake May. We talk about Caleb Williams being some of those top two guys that are being considered as the 1-2s of the NFL draft at that position. But then there's the Bo Nixes that we talked about, the Michael Penixes, obviously Jaden Daniels. Do you look at where Denver is at? Part of me is wondering, I think, and you and I talked about this earlier, I think that they should draft a quarterback at pick number 12 this year, but it has to be a guy that they like and not just a guy just to take a quarterback, just to take one, in my firm opinion.
I completely agreed with you, Cody. I think you go the draft route unless you get a guy like Kirk Cousins, and maybe even in that case, you still draft somebody in the mid to later rounds. But I mean, that's the direction that I see this team going, unless you can get a Kirk Cousins to replace Russell Wilson, which would effectively be an upgrade immediately at the position, in my opinion. I mean, Cousins is a really good player and probably one of the more underrated quarterbacks in the league. Unless you can do that, I don't think there's any way that you can have one without the other. I think you have to sign somebody and draft somebody this offseason, because for Sean Payton, I mean, you kind of got to fall in love with a couple guys, right? You got to take a shot on somebody in free agency that could get you to those 9 wins like your ownership expects, but you've also got to have a guy that can be the future of your organization. And that guy has to be somewhat in place, or you have to throw a dart. We talked about this before. Sean Payton has never used a first or second round pick on the quarterback position, dating back to his time in New Orleans. And so it would be a first for him and for George Paton. This would be the first. Has George Paton drafted a quarterback with the Broncos? I mean, so this would be a first for both of these guys. And you can't help but wonder, are they just gun shy at this point? I mean, I'm not going to accuse them of anything, Cody, but to go 3 draft classes without drafting a quarterback, and for Sean Payton to never, even with Drew Brees, to never have taken a shot on a first or second rounder, especially late in his tenure there, going to be a wild offseason to find out if one of those things could be happening for the first time. And I think that is the route. If you don't get Kirk Cousins, you got to get a free agent and draft somebody.
I think one of the bigger concerns about Kirk, and validly so, is obviously he's getting up there in age, but he's also coming off of an Achilles injury. I mean, we talk about medical so much with NFL draft prospects. What's the Achilles like? Where is he at with that? What's that going to look like? But even on top of that, when it comes to the NFL draft, and obviously the situations you outlined with George and Sean and not having drafted a quarterback or taken a quarterback in the first round, I think you this is one of those analogies where it's like you can't let the fear of striking out keep you from playing the game, because if that's the case, scared money don't make money. And the Broncos are in a position where, like, you don't want to reach for a guy, but you can't be afraid to take a calculated risk if you know that, hey, this guy has traits, he has tools that could translate into success at some point, maybe not right away, but at some point gives us the best chance to win from an offensive standpoint. You have to take that chance if that guy is there. I hope that's the case here for the Broncos this offseason. We'll obviously find out. There's going to be some buildup along the way here. Broncos Country, that'll wrap up today's episode. Lockdown Broncos here on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast for free every single day all year long, because for the true fan, there is never an offseason. We're going to continue our position review series. We're going to take a look tomorrow at the running back position for Denver. Javonte Williams coming off of a year where he returned from injury in a miraculous fashion. Didn't have the year he anticipated, but could Javonte be back in a big way here in 2024? Will Jaleel McLaughlin have a bigger role? We'll dive deeper to that here on tomorrow's brand new episode, Locked on Broncos.